Few psychological events have the power to transform the internal structure of a human being, like betrayal. Contrary to popular belief, it is not merely a simple breach of trust between two people. Betrayal, whether from a romantic partner, a friend, a family member, or an authority figure, acts like a seismic impact on the unconscious, destabilizing fundamental beliefs about the world, about others, and, most importantly, about oneself. The experience of betrayal shakes something deep and primitive. It forces us to confront a brutal truth, that those in whom we place our love, loyalty, and trust are also capable of hurting us, not just out of malice, but out of weakness, selfishness, cowardice, or even indifference. And this realization destroys not only the image of the other, but also the image we have built of ourselves. After all, how could we have allowed this? How did we not see? How did we not perceive the signs? Carl Gustav Jung was one of the few psychologists to explore the depths of this wound with clarity and courage. In his work, he describes how betrayal activates a set of internal forces that go far beyond immediate emotional suffering. It awakens what he called complexes, unconscious emotional cores that carry traumatic memories, both individual and collective. In the case of betrayal, what is activated is a complex that resonates with ancestral wounds related to survival, exclusion, abandonment, and humiliation. Therefore, the pain caused by betrayal often seems exaggerated, greater than the event itself, because it does not belong solely to the present. It echoes through generations. But there is an even more devastating aspect of this experience: the confrontation with one's own shadow. When someone is betrayed, they tend to automatically think of themselves as a victim, and indeed they are to some extent. However, upon deeper analysis, one realizes that there is a portion of this pain that arises from our own unconscious participation in the drama. Jung observed that we often project idealized qualities onto others, blinding ourselves to behaviors and signs that, if seen clearly, could have prevented the disaster, or at the very least, prepared us for it. This realization is unbearable for many. Admitting that, in some way, we made poor choices, ignored warnings, or accepted crumbs in the name of an illusion is a deep blow to the ego. But it is also at this very point of ruin that something new can be born. Jung believed that it is precisely in moments of greatest psychic collapse that the possibility of authentic transformation presents itself. Betrayal, as cruel as it may be, has the potential to free us from illusion, to reconnect us with our intuition, and to make us more complete, more lucid, and less vulnerable human beings. This video is a deep dive into this process. It is not about shallow advice, motivational phrases, or empty promises of overcoming. What you will hear here is a psychological and symbolic dissection of betrayal as an archetypal phenomenon, something that transcends individual experience and touches the deeper structures of the collective unconscious. Throughout the upcoming parts, we will understand why betrayal destroys us, why it transforms us, and most importantly, how it can, if well understood, become a brutal yet powerful path to psychological awakening. Prepare to confront uncomfortable truths, because, as Jung said, there is no enlightenment without confronting the darkness, and betrayal is perhaps one of the darkest nights of the soul. Betrayal is not just a painful event, it is a collapse of psychic reality. When we are betrayed, especially by someone we trusted deeply, we do not just lose a relationship, we lose our footing, we lose our sense of predictability, and often, we lose parts of ourselves that were rooted in that connection. Trust, built over time on small gestures, words, and promises, is destroyed in seconds. And with it, an entire internal architecture of emotional security crumbles. Carl Jung understood this type of rupture as something much deeper than a mere emotional shock. For him, The human mind organizes its experience through symbols, images, and archetypal patterns. When one of these patterns is violated, such as the archetype of the protective father, the nurturing mother, the loyal partner, or the faithful friend, the collapse is not just relational, it is symbolic. The image of the other, carefully constructed and idealized, is shattered in the face of an unbearable reality. That evil, disloyalty, abandonment often comes from those we love the most. This profound rupture with the idealized image of the other generates a state of disorientation. The ego, which had projected part of its identity onto this relationship, suddenly finds itself without reference. Questions like, "Who am I now? Who can I trust?" Or, "How did I not see this before?" emerge forcefully, accompanied by guilt, shame, and a diffuse anger that often finds no clear target. The external world remains the same, but the way the psyche interprets it transforms radically. Jung described this experience as an activation of unconscious contents. When consciousness collapses, the unconscious takes control. Old memories of rejection, humiliation, and abandonment are reactivated. Primitive sensations of threat, harking back to the early years of life, or even to the collective unconscious, take over. The pain becomes disproportionate to the event because it carries the weight of all the other unresolved pains that were lurking, waiting to manifest. And that is why many people, after a betrayal, report not just sadness, but a deep existential crisis. The trauma is not only in what happened, but in what was revealed. That our perception of reality can be deceptive, that love does not guarantee safety, and that no one is immune to human darkness. For many, this revelation is unbearable. For others, it is the beginning of a reconstruction. But before this reconstruction can happen, it is necessary to understand why the pain of betrayal seems to echo so deeply within us, far beyond logic, far beyond reason. The next step of this journey will lead us to the understanding of what Jung called the betrayal complex, an archetypal wound that connects our personal pain to ancestral suffering. It is at this point that betrayal ceases to be just yours and reveals itself as part of a much greater pain. If this content is making sense to you, click the subscribe button and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for your support. The pain of betrayal is rarely proportional to the act itself. Sometimes, a relatively small gesture, a lie, an omission, a breach of agreement, triggers an emotional avalanche that seems impossible to contain. The intensity of the suffering often surprises even those who feel it. And this is not by chance. For Carl Jung, this emotional disproportion indicates something much deeper, the activation of an archetypal complex. In the case of betrayal, it is what we might call the betrayal complex, an unconscious structure that resonates with universal wounds of the human condition. According to Jung, complexes are like living entities in the unconscious. They have their own life, their own emotions, their own desires. And when they are activated, they take control of the psyche, hijacking reason, lucidity, and even the identity of the ego. The betrayal complex is especially powerful because it touches on the oldest fibers of human experience. The fear of being abandoned, the terror of not belonging, the anguish of being deceived by those we trust with our survival. These are experiences that date back to childhood, and even more deeply, to the archetypal memories of the collective unconscious. It is important to remember that for Jung, the collective unconscious is not a metaphor. It is a real dimension of the psyche, composed of ancestral symbols and patterns that have shaped human behavior since the dawn of civilization. When we are betrayed, we access not only our personal pain, but also the fear of exile from the tribe, of exclusion from the group, of losing the protection of the clan. In symbolic terms, betrayal activates the feeling of being on the edge of the abyss, unprotected, vulnerable, and invisible in the face of a hostile world. It is the same psychic terror that our ancestors faced when they were rejected by their community, something that, at that time, represented death. And that is precisely why betrayal generates such intense symptoms. Insomnia, obsession, despair, mental confusion, somatizations. The body responds as if it were fighting for its life, and in a way, it is. Because something in us, a way of existing, a relational identity, a structure of meanings, is dying. The betrayal complex, when activated, exposes everything we had hidden from ourselves, our neediness, our need for approval, our blind idealization, our emotional dependency. It forces us to see, and what we see is often unbearable. But there is something even more disconcerting about this process. Betrayal reveals not only the truth about the other, it also reveals the truth about us. It exposes our psychic fragility, our tendency to denial, our addiction to fantasies of security. And most importantly, it forces us to confront the most uncomfortable part of our personality, the one Jung called the shadow. It is about this shadow that we will talk in the next part. Because to truly understand the impact of betrayal, it is not enough to analyze what was done to us. We must confront what we allowed to be done, and what in us unconsciously contributed to what happened. Betrayal is a mirror, and the reflected image is not always what we would like to see. If there is anything more painful than being betrayed by someone we trusted, it is the moment we realize that, on some level, we were complicit in that experience. Not consciously, of course, but through denial, idealization, and the refusal to see what was in front of us all along. It is precisely at this point that betrayal ceases to be merely an external drama and transforms into a process of internal revelation. Carl Jung called this confrontation with the shadow. The shadow, for Jung, represents all aspects of our psyche that have been repressed, ignored, or rejected, that which does not fit into the image we have constructed of ourselves. When we think of the shadow, many only imagine aggressive impulses, selfish traits, or hidden desires. But the shadow can be much more subtle. It also includes our naivety, our desperate need for love, our emotional dependency, our tendency to avoid conflict at all costs, traits that, although they may seem harmless or even noble, can place us in situations of deep vulnerability. Betrayal, in this context, acts as a brutal trigger for this confrontation. It breaks the veneer of the persona, the social and psychological mask we wear to navigate the world, and forces us to face the parts of ourselves that unconsciously contributed to that outcome. Perhaps we ignored obvious signs out of fear of losing the relationship. Perhaps we clung to a projection, believing we loved a person who, in reality, never existed in that way. Perhaps we gave away too much power, believing we depended on the other to be whole. The shadow manifests precisely in these self-destructive patterns that repeat silently until a crisis makes them visible. In this sense, Jung asserted, what we do not confront in our unconscious appears in our life as fate. Betrayal, no matter how devastating, is often not a cruel accident, but the inevitable unfolding of unconscious forces that were in motion long before the event occurred. And instead of being mere victims, we become part of the plot. Not because we wanted to, but because we were blind to ourselves. This recognition, however, is unbearable for the ego. It shatters the comfortable narrative of "I was betrayed" and transforms it into "I betrayed myself too." The pain intensifies, but along with it, something rare is born: lucidity. When we accept to look at the shadow without judging it, without fleeing from it, we take the first step towards integration. And here lies the Jungian paradox. Betrayal, which seems to tear us apart, can also be the event that brings us closer to our psychic wholeness. Because it is in this confrontation with the shadow that we begin to become whole, not perfect, but conscious. Therefore, it is futile to seek only external culprits. The true power lies in understanding how our own psychodynamics led us there. The shadow, when recognized, ceases to dominate us from behind and begins to work in our favor. It transforms from a silent enemy into a transformative ally. But this transformation does not happen automatically. It requires an arduous process of assimilation, reconstruction, and psychological rebirth. And it is precisely about this that we will talk in the next part. How to survive the symbolic death caused by betrayal, and how it can become the portal to a more authentic, stronger, and more awakened version of who we truly are. The experience of betrayal is, in essence, a death. Not a physical death, but a symbolic, deep, and devastating death. Something in us ceases to exist when we are betrayed. The naivety of believing that love is enough, the security of thinking that some people would never hurt us, the illusion that we are immune to evil or human weakness. This psychological death is what Jung described as a collapse of the ego, the implosion of the image that sustained our identity until then. What once seemed solid disintegrates, and we are forced to confront the void. This void, however, is not just destruction. It is also a fertile space, a psychic ground where something new can be born. Jung observed that great sufferings, no matter how cruel, carry a unique transformative potential. When consciousness is shattered, the unconscious emerges forcefully, bringing symbols, dreams, and impulses that serve as guides for reconstruction. It is at this point that legitimate suffering, if accepted and faced, can become a kind of initiation, a painful but necessary passage to a new level of consciousness. From a psychological perspective, betrayal forces an internal reconfiguration. The betrayed individual, after the initial collapse, begins to develop new psychic skills, a sharper intuition to perceive signs of falsehood, firmer boundaries to protect their own integrity, and a deeper compassion, not the naive compassion that blindly forgives, but a mature compassion rooted in the recognition of human pain. This process does not happen quickly, nor without resistance. The ego struggles to cling to what no longer exists, but the more we try to return to who we were before, the more we suffer. The only real path is to accept that a part of us has died, and to allow another part, stronger and more aware, to be born. This psychological rebirth is not just individual, it has a universal dimension. Those who go through the dark night of betrayal and manage to cross it emerge as someone closer to what Jung called individuation, the process of becoming a whole human being, aware of their light and shadow. Pain, in this sense, transforms into a teacher. It teaches us to abandon illusions, to let go of dependencies, to see beyond masks. And paradoxically, it is this destruction that opens space for a more authentic life. But here arises a crucial question: how to transform this suffering into growth, instead of allowing it to crystallize into bitterness? How to prevent the symbolic death from becoming mere ruin and resentment, instead of being a portal to evolution? To answer this, we need to understand the path that Jung called individuation, the process by which the psyche integrates its shadow, reconstructs its wholeness, and finds authentic meaning in its own suffering. It is exactly about this path, arduous but liberating, that we will talk in the next part. If what you're hearing resonates with you, you'll find real value in my ebooks. Beyond the Shadow breaks down Jung's core ideas, while Dialogues with the Unconscious gives you a 30-day path to apply them in your life. Both are linked in the pinned comment. If betrayal is a psychological death, the process of individuation is rebirth. For Jung, individuation does not mean becoming perfect or free from pain, but rather integrating the fragments of the psyche into a more conscious unity. The wound of betrayal, no matter how brutal, can serve as a catalyst for this process. Because it is precisely when illusions collapse that we are forced to confront the raw reality of our own mind. and to choose between remaining in ruins or transforming pain into psychic power. The path of individuation after betrayal requires, above all, abandoning the temptation to fixate on the role of the victim. The ego loves to feed on the narrative of, "I was wronged." This role brings comfort, but it also traps. As long as we remain identified with victimization, all the focus is on the other, on the betrayer, the act, the injustice. Jung reminds us that the real work begins when we look inward. What in me allowed this to happen? What aspects of my shadow were ignored? What parts of my psyche were so hungry that they accepted less than they deserved? This kind of self-reflection is not comfortable, but it is what distinguishes those who become bitter from those who become wise. Individuation is the opposite of denial. It does not seek to erase the pain of betrayal, but to give it a place in the whole of experience. This means accepting that we were deceived, that we trusted in illusions, that we failed to see signs. But it also means recognizing that we survived, that we learned, and that we now have a broader view of the human condition. Jung said that we do not become enlightened merely by contemplating the light, but by making the darkness conscious. Betrayal is one of those darknesses, and only those who have the courage to traverse it can emerge transformed. It is in this process that we begin to rebuild healthier psychic boundaries. The individual who has integrated the experience of betrayal does not become cynical or closed off, but learns to trust in a different way. Their trust is no longer a naive surrender, but a conscious choice. They learn to recognize patterns of manipulation, to value their own intuition, to set clear boundaries. They are no longer vulnerable in the same way. And this is precisely what makes the pain of betrayal paradoxically valuable. It reconnects us to an inner strength that only emerges when everything else has been lost. Ultimately, individuation brings a rare kind of compassion. Those who have traversed betrayal not only understand their own pain, but begin to see the pain of others more deeply. This compassion is not naive. It knows what humans are capable of, both good and bad. But precisely for that reason, it is more authentic. The person who emerges from this process is no longer the same. They are more awake, more whole, more capable of living according to their truth. And here we reach the climax of the journey, understanding that betrayal, although it shattered us, did not leave us in the same place. It forced us to evolve, to abandon illusions, and to awaken to a higher consciousness. But there remains one last reflection. What does it really mean to live after this awakening? How to transform this experience into a new way of existing in the world, more lucid and more true? This is exactly what we will explore in the next part, where the conclusion ties together this entire process, from the initial destruction to the final rebirth. In the end, the truth is harsh. No one comes out of a betrayal the same way they entered. Something in you dies, and something in you is reborn. But the rebirth is not automatic. It is not guaranteed. Many remain trapped in the cycle of bitterness, repeating the same story, distrusting everyone, closing their hearts. Others, however, manage to cross this dark tunnel and emerge different, transformed, more aware. And this is where the true gift, hidden behind the pain, lies. Betrayal not only destroys you, it can also awaken you. Jung understood this awakening as a shift in the level of consciousness. The individual who faced the wound no longer sees the world with the same eyes. They do not place their security in fragile illusions, do not blindly give their trust, do not project onto others what they should cultivate within themselves. This awakening is, above all, an act of inner freedom. You discover that you can live without the validation of others, that you can rebuild yourself from your own essence, that you can love again without losing yourself in love. This process brings with it a new clarity. You begin to see falsehoods that previously went unnoticed. Learn to recognize manipulations in subtleties, feel when something is not aligned. And at the same time, you start to value genuine relationships in a deeper way, because you know the cost of living in illusion. Betrayal makes you more selective, but also more truthful. It does not close you off from life. It teaches you to choose better whom to share your life with. The awakening also changes the way you see yourself. You no longer see yourself merely as a victim. You understand your unconscious participation, your patterns, your projections. This does not diminish the gravity of what was done to you, but it increases your responsibility for who you become afterward. Betrayal forces you to look at the shadow, but it also gives you the chance to integrate that shadow and transform pain into wisdom. That is why many, years after a betrayal, realize that it was this event, so devastating at the time, that pushed them onto a path of authenticity they would never have chosen alone. And this is exactly what makes betrayal a kind of psychological rite of passage. It marks the end of a version of you that could no longer continue to exist, and the birth of a new version, more awake, stronger, and more aware. This is the choice before you. Either you let betrayal consume you, turning your life to ashes, or you integrate it and rise from the ashes as someone who can never be deceived in the same way again. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever gone through a betrayal that changed you forever? How did this experience shape who you are today? Share your story in the comments, because by sharing your story, you not only free yourself a little more, but you also help others who are facing the same darkness. And remember, this video was just a step in the journey. In the next one, we will continue to explore ideas that are fundamental to understanding the human mind in all its depth. Don't miss it, because it's important, perhaps more than you imagine.